So good morning to everybody. My name is Inari Sakki and I come from University of Helsinki. And this is Helsinki. It looked almost like this when I left yesterday, so winter has arrived. In this presentation, I discuss a topic that most of us are very familiar with. So I'm going to talk about formation processes of social representations, and this is a topic that seems to have rather hegemonic status within theory. It's not too often critically discussed, which is the reason why I wanted to bring it here today. And this presentation is based on 2 articles I've written together with 2 of my very good, excellent doctoral students, with Rusten Menard and with EEmeli Hakoköngäs. But since I come from very periphery, I will first shortly position myself within this approach. So I've listed here on the top the broad themes that I've been working with. My PhD was about social representations of European integration in textbooks of 5 countries, and this is a topic that I still continue, but now as an international collaboration within cost action. And the next following themes have been more central in my postdoc research. And all these 4 themes on top are strongly, of course, related to each other, and they are very central in my current research, in which I analyze history representations in media, in politics, and in education. And the last topic is actually Anna-Maija's project, in which I've also been working. But important is that my approach on social representations has been mainly qualitative. So I see social representation theory as a social constructionist theory. And I've used a variety of different data sources. I've used textbooks, party programs, political blogs, newspapers, legislation, etc. And particularly lately, I've also used lots of visuals. I've tried to develop my own qualitative approach to analyze anchorings and objectifications and narrative core of social representation in my material. And I've also been interested in combining social representation theory with other approaches, because I feel it's very compatible with discursive psychology and critical discursive psychology, and also with Barthes semiotics. And this is because I feel that some of these approaches may have better defined methodological tools for the analysis of function aspect of social representation. And of course, Barthes' approach fits well when we analyze visuals. And your social representation analysis is too descriptive, is a comment I've sometimes received when I try to publish my papers using this framework in international journals. And perhaps it's something we can also discuss together today at some point. So I feel that especially the question what social representations do, the action part of it, requires tools from other approaches, such as from discourse analysis. So to go into the topic of my presentation, let's first take a look at the very simple definition of a social representation provided by Serge Moscovici, which quite nicely illustrates the significance of formation processes. So according to Moscovici, representation is an image and signification. So in this view, it's the process of objectification that produces the figurative aspect of representation, while the process of anchoring gives a representation a meaning. And this definition is important for my conceptualization of these basic processes. I try to go through these basics very briefly. I want to save some time. So I guess there is more or less a shared understanding about objectification process. So it's a process through which an abstract idea is made concrete, and this concretization may take various forms. It may take a form of symbol, metaphor, figure, etc. And objectification is sometimes split into 3 different phases that Jodelet has summarized as information selection, schematization, and naturalization. Anchoring, on the other hand, seems to have more non-consensual nature. So within social representation theory, there seems to be quite several ways to understand and conceptualize this process. But usually it's described on a rather general level. So when we anchor, we integrate a new phenomenon into an old and familiar system of categories. So anchoring is about naming, it's about classifying and naming something. So this something is identified and imposed a set of familiar, existing, or imagined characteristics in a culture-specific and value-laden way. And I think this is very important. So anchoring is not just about the integration of the new into the old, but for me, it's above all about making the meaning. So in social representation theory, representation formation has been primarily treated as something that happens at the beginning when something new appears for the first time. So my argument here is that treating representation in this manner gives the impression that representations are conceptualized as having a clear and definite beginning, marked by they being anchored in the old and familiar structures. So this is an aspect of social representation theory that I would like to problematize here. So if the primary focus of the theory is on the new and emerging phenomena, my question is, what about other socio-psychologically important questions and phenomena, especially those which are already there in society, some of which may have very normative or ideological status, such as questions related to history or social values. Of course, it would be very wrong to say that these topics are not yet analyzed within this theory, because of course they are, but not too extensively and not as naturalized representations. So in this presentation, I would like to ask whether we should start talking more about this third process of social representation separately from the process of objectification and take it as a starting point of social representation research. And if we do so, what would be the consequences for these original key concepts of the theory for anchoring and objectification? So I would like to argue here for the importance of analyzing naturalized representations. And of course, our thoughts on naturalization have been inspired by Gina Philogen's work. I think she is not present here today. But anyway, thanks to her work, in our unit in Helsinki, we always teach our students that there are 3 processes of social representations instead of just 2. So what is naturalization? It is a process through which something abstract becomes real, an object becomes part of social reality. So the naturalized object becomes an instrument that can be used to categorize, that become an anchoring point for other new concepts and objects. And why naturalization process is so important? So naturalization describes representation as a tool with which to categorize on a more general level. So naturalized representations, they continue to process and be processed, they continue to categorize and be categorized, and they continue to transfer and be transformed. So even as they become less what is talked about in society and more about what is used to enable everyday social communication, they are still transforming. And I argue that these naturalized representations are very powerful. They become taken for granted knowledge, an unquestionable norm that people use as a reference point when they make sense of other emerging new phenomena. So, social representation theory was originally developed to explain how new phenomena emerge and become part of social world. Instead, naturalized representations are not new phenomena, but they are constructions that are already socially meaningful, and they have found a permanent role in social reality. So in this presentation, I argue that the refocus and reconceptualization of formation processes is necessary for this theory, to be better equipped to provide a dynamic approach for such phenomena as social representations of history and collective memory, as we will now see. So, first, to make my starting point more clear, we have argued in our papers that collective memories are naturalized social representations of history. In one of our very recent papers with EEmeli Hakoköngäs, we have provided this model in which communication about the past, representing the past, social representations of history, and collective memory constitute a continuous circle. So, social communication about the past in media, in textbooks, in internet, in art, etc., leads to the formation of social representations of history that are narratives of national story, some of which are more hegemonic, some of which are more polemic, and of some which are then finally, in the third step, preserved in collective memory through the process of naturalization. And this circle keeps moving as collective memory then guides the social communication in the future, and in this way the old knowledge is always present while the new conceptions are constructed. And these basic processes of social representations allow to analyze this dynamic formation of collective memories. And let me still say something about this picture. We all have to remember that all this takes place in a particular time, in a particular social and cultural and political context. So a sudden dramatic change of the context, such as a refugee crisis or Brexit crisis or Donald Trump's victory, may lead to the changes in different phases of this circle. So this is just a demonstrative example and speculation, of course, but now, for instance, following Donald Trump's victory, also the hate speech became more legitimized and normalized, which could possibly mean that now some minority groups start to appear in more negative light in public discussions, in media, in textbooks, which could then slowly but surely, through the process of anchoring and objectification, start to bring new narratives, and that could be then finally stored in the collective memory or national identity of Americans. Now I will tell you more about the collective memory in Finland. I will continue with this figure to make it more clear, but now in Finnish context. So if we take a look at the very first step in this circle, representing history, so this is an active process of commemoration. It's representing history in different areas of society, in traditional media, in newspapers, TV, in social media, such as blogs, in school textbooks, in arts, in literature, in ads, etc. I have chosen these examples very quickly and very randomly by Googling, so they are just very restricted examples. But even when we look at them, we can see something quite interesting in terms of the formation processes of social representations. Because already there we see some patterns that we have found in our analysis of visual collective memory in Finland. First, we see there are a couple of politicians on the right and on the very left. They happen to be our former presidents, Urho Kekkonen and Carl Gustaf Mannerheim. And these are the persons that are most often named as the most significant Finnish figures in other studies on Finnish history conceptions. And we see there are other objectifications, like costumes that relate to the war, another important element for Finnish collective memory. We see there are other symbols too, a flag, a lake, a runner, naked young woman. We see there a mystic older man wearing a funny costume. We see there several pictures of Senate Square that is located in the city of Helsinki. And in fact, in our analysis, we have concluded that this very place is, in Pierre Nora's terms, a place of memory for Finnish people because it's the most often visualized place in the photos that represent Finland. But what about the anchors behind or meanings behind these images? We see there some signs of anchors that we have found significant also in our study of visual collective memory in Finland, such as nature, war, leadership, mythological past, and sport. So what kind of social representations of history, narratives of nation are then constructed through these processes of social representations? So we find there signs of different stories, including the history of strong leaders, history of 2 wars, especially the narrative of the miracle of Winter War is very well presented. So this is a narrative that tells how Finnish people were united by the war against big Soviet Union. It was a war where we fought very bravely and almost won the war. That's very important. And then there is this narrative of a prehistorical, ancient Finnishness. And nature refers to the shared narrative of Finland as a country of thousands of lakes and forests. So the relationship to nature is something very fundamental for Finnish people. And of course, then there are some narratives that are not so visible in these restricted examples I put here, such as the narrative of Finnish education and equality and technology. Well, the last one, of course, has been downgraded after the fall of Nokia, after the loss of our greatest symbol, which also tells how the context, even economic context, may shape the social representations. Well, how these different narratives, very different narratives, are then binded together to construct a coherent collective memory. Let us again take a look at these examples. Perhaps we see there something. So I would suggest that one such binding, uniting element might be, surprisingly, the color of blue and white. So these different narratives are packed together in the color of blue. And well, of course, this choice of the color is not arbitrary. It's quite contrary, because the blue color holds, and these colors hold multiple meanings for Finnish people. Of course, they are the colors of our flag, the main symbol. And they are sources of many metaphors, as purity, snow, sea, blue sky. So it's an umbrella that gathers many meanings of Finnishness. But it's good to remember that it's rather new invention, because before year 1980, we had completely different colors. We had colors of red and yellow mainly. So why it's so important to underline blue color is, of course, to differentiate ourselves from our neighbors, especially from the former Soviet Union. And important for the narratives that build the collective memory is that through anchoring, not just to the past, but also to the present and future, they serve a story of a long continuity, a story of eternal history of Finland. But what are the consequences that could follow from the analysis of naturalized representations for the conceptualization of basic processes then? So as I elaborated in this figure, it might be reasonable to split objectification process into different phases, as Moscovici and Jodelet have suggested. We could think that when we analyze collective memory or other types of naturalized representations, information selection, schematization, and naturalization work in different stages of the formation. And when we analyze naturalized representations, an important consequence for the process of anchoring is that we are not only integrating the new into the old, but we are also very creatively integrating the past in the present and also to the future. For example, the formation of social representation of Finnish history is not only directed towards the past ideas, towards the agricultural life or ancient Finnishness, but it can be also creatively added in the present and future to the meanings of urbanization or progress. And these very different anchors, they serve the same purpose. They serve the same goal of a long, even eternal history of Finland. And another consequences of the analysis of naturalized representation is that anchors themselves are part of the phenomenon and are already familiar. So they are not necessarily something outside the phenomenon we study. For instance, when we study Finnish history, that is naturalized representation, its anchors, nature, leadership, etc., are themselves already part of the phenomenon. So anchoring is not based on novelty, but on familiarity. And this circle keeps continuing, so these naturalized representations need to be made significant, they need to be repeated regularly, otherwise they will fall into social memory lapse. So even naturalized representations continue to process and be processed. They continue to categorize and be categorized and transform and be transformed. And finally, to conclude, so alongside the focus on new and emerging phenomena, I think there should be more focus on naturalization and naturalized representations. Why? Because they are very deep-rooted, which make them very difficult to contest and even perceive. So this naturalized knowledge serves as a vehicle of power. So these naturalized representations can be used to talk about how we see ourselves, how we see others and society. They can serve as tools for political rhetoric and decision-making, to legitimize certain social categories and to exclude other categories. So I would suggest that one task for social psychologists is to analyze these deep-rooted naturalized representations that legitimize certain, sometimes negative and prejudicial practices. Thank you very much for your attention.